right, it is 1:01, so we are just about ready to get started. I do want to call everyone's attention to some of our housekeeping, so we'll go over that slide pretty quickly here. But I do want to say welcome and thank you to everyone who's joining us. I know we've had an unprecedented and very rapid response when we announced this chat, so we very much appreciate all of you joining us today to have these important conversations. And we're very excited to get started with today's chat. All right, so to kick us off, I'm going to go over some of our housekeeping here to make sure that everybody's on the same page about how today is going to run. So, contrary to some of our past chat and learns, I know if you've joined us previously, we've been about making things an open conversation. We had an outpouring of really important and really powerful questions for today. So I want to make sure that we are respectful of the fact that so many people ask so many great questions. So instead of making things an open conversation between, involving our community and everyone that's on chat today, what we're going to be doing is sticking to the questions that were pre-submitted, and we're going to be going over them just between Deanna and I very much encourage everyone to be, if you have other additional questions or other things that you'd like to know about, you're more than welcome to put those items into the Zoom chat. And we will have a couple of PowerToFly people on the chat as well, helping to monitor and answer questions where possible. So let's see here. The other thing that I did want to go over before I introduce our speaker for today, I want to make sure that everybody understands that this can be a very difficult subject for a lot of people to talk about. I'm very eager to dive in, and I know Deanna is too, but we want to be conscious and very mindful of the fact that this is a lot of lift on any person, individually or otherwise, that no person is a representative for every person in their group. So Deanna's responses on all of these things are very important, and we very much appreciate her taking the time to talk to us about all of this. So while we all get to learn and experience this, in kind of a safe space and educate ourselves and learn more, it's important to keep in mind that being able to learn about this in a space like this is a privilege instead of having to experience racism firsthand. So we are incredibly grateful to Deanna for taking on that lift and putting herself out there and being willing to come out into this space and help us all to better understand how we can be helpful, how we can have conversations about these subjects, how this whole thing can work. So to that end, I'm going to introduce you to our speaker, and let's move along here. All right, so to those of you who don't know, this is Deanna Smith. She is she started working for PowerToFly in 2019. Deanna served as the head of global talent strategies and recruitment programs at Delta Airlines before she joined us. She was named to Atlanta Business Chronicle's 40 Under 40 list and is a regularly featured speaker at conferences. She is most proud of being a mother to 5 outstanding children, and she is also our head of global diversity and inclusion. So thank you, Deanna, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk. And again, I really appreciate, Meg, your statement before about sharing these experiences. And anytime I'm talking to anyone about this, I do think it's very important to realize the answers to these questions are based on some personal preference, and I'll try to distinguish between that and kind of factual information as we go through this. But that we're all different. But I would love to just be able to give you kind of a general idea and some insight on how your Black peers and colleagues may be feeling, what has been super helpful for me thus far, and for others. And of course, because I do diversity and inclusion work, I'm very honored to be able to have these open conversations with people even prior to this happening. So again, excited to be able to share with you all. I will go ahead, kind of the elephant in the room. So I have a 6-week-old baby who's on my lap. I'm not sure if he's on film or not. And if he wakes up, I have someone on standby, but if I move him, he's definitely gonna wake up. So we're just gonna keep it moving for now. So thank you all for that.
Oh yeah, my mom always told me never move a sleeping child.
That's okay. You'll be fine, right?
Yeah. All right, so to that end, before we move forward, I do want to just call out, if you are not on mute, normally we do not mute our community, especially during important conversations, but if you are not on mute, please mute so that way we don't have any audio interference for anybody else that's on the chat today. If you have additional questions about anything, again, please feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to try and respond if people have questions on terminology or acronyms or anything like that. Please feel free to put them in there. We've got some PowerToFly people on standby to help moderate. And just to address the questions that we were sent in, there's a couple slides of them, but I do just want to say that we received so many amazing questions here. A lot of them that were more hiring or business oriented. We are going to be doing a business version, like a B2B version of this chat next week. So keep your eyes peeled for the announcement emails on that. There will also be obviously things posted on our social, so you can find information there. All right, so we've got 2 slides of these questions. Deanna, let's start with the first one here. Okay. This person says, I feel really uncomfortable saying Black people, African American, or women of color. Is there a preference within the community?
So that's an excellent question, and I actually hear that pretty often. So I'm probably not going to give you the straightforward answer that you would like, because this definitely has to do with preference, right? So there are people who would prefer to be called Black. There are people that prefer the term African American. You can also refer to someone as African American, and they can quickly tell you, you know, I'm American, right? And so they may feel that that you were taking that away from them somehow. So what I would say with this is that usually throughout work and like more formal conversations, et cetera, I tend to hear people say African American when they're talking at work, they're talking about groups of people, et cetera. Because of the movement and because of everything going on right now, you're hearing Black a lot more than I have typically heard on, like I said, within the workplace lately. I don't think that there's a wrong answer. I think you should be perfectly comfortable if you have a Black or African American that you typically use, and if you want to ask the person if they have a preference. The theme that you'll see throughout this chat is open communication and just asking people, realizing that we're all individuals. There are obviously some things that we have in common, and I'm going to try to share a bunch of that today. But just asking the person. Also, if someone is talking to you, listen to what they're referring to themselves as, right? So they may refer to themselves as African American and not Black, and that will kind of help you understand their preference also. The women of color, I have had some conversations over the last couple of weeks where people wanted to distinguish Black women coming outside of the woman of color, because women of color really was a term that was used to describe a bunch of different ethnicities and minority groups, and giving us a collective voice on a number of topics. So you'll see the term people of color or women of color. What we're talking about today and what's going on in our country, I think it's important for you to realize that this is about Black people. This particular movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. So when we're talking about events and so it's so important. This is one of the kind of few times that we've been very, very specific. It's about the plight of people whose, ancestors in America were formerly slaves. Like, we're specifically talking about Black people. So it's okay to distinguish between the two. You're talking about diversity in general. If you want to be inclusive of, we say about brown brothers and sisters, then the women of color, by all means, would be more of a collective term.
Thank you for specifying that for people, because I think it can be people don't want to make a misstep. They don't want to cause offense. But I think you're right. I think that's a very good way to poise it, and to kind of, I usually liken it to the fact of, if you know someone that's legal name is Michael, but they ask you to call them Mike, of course you're going to call them Mike.
Absolutely.
And it's as simple as that. If you make a misstep, say, oh, I'm sorry, what do you prefer? There's very easy ways to try and help navigate this. And again, if anybody has questions on terminology or acronyms or anything that we're using, please throw that up in the Zoom chat and we will try and answer those as they come. All right, so this person had asked, how can I initiate conversation about recent racial events? What else can I say besides, how are you feeling about it? How can I let my colleagues know that I support them? And the way I read this question was coming as either a white person or a non-minority individual asking how they can be supportive right now.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. Probably one of the most prevalent questions right now is, how can I reach out? How can I be an ally or help without stepping on toes or just saying the wrong thing? People are really worried or afraid of saying the wrong thing. So there's a couple different things that I'd like to mention here. So when we talk about initiating the conversation for recent racial events, I'll tell you right now, for me, it's more odd for someone to jump into a conversation or an email, or even as we're having meetings and like we just pretend that this is business as usual. That is a lot more, that's odd right now. It really is, right? So we've got a ton going on. Remember, we're dealing with human beings. We're human beings. Being open, and if you're caring about how another human being feels, lead with that. What I would urge, and what you'll hear me like really talk about throughout this conversation, is not to be so concerned about making a mistake, about saying the wrong thing. And I know that that's a concern from people. I know that these conversations and putting yourself out there like that is uncomfortable. But as I told a white colleague a couple days ago that I was chatting with, it's far more uncomfortable to have a knee on your neck than it is for us to have these tough conversations. We, because of everything going on, are having conversations and are seeing companies and people stand up in ways that they haven't. We've got to take advantage of this time, and there's no time to waste. There's no time for us to fiddle and worry. Am I saying exactly the right thing or wrong thing? What I will tell you is that I shouldn't say most or many, but people will correct you if you do something that they feel is belittling or patronizing or whatever it may be. They will usually let you know. But I would say in this scenario, it's better to err on the side of just being a good, caring human than worrying about what if I make a misstep or if I say the wrong thing. So to talk about events going on in your town, that there have been protests, right? Many times bringing up these conversations, certain words are going to be important. So I've had some white counterparts referring to the movement as riots. That's insulting. It's not a riot, right? When you think of riot, typically we're thinking of looting, we're thinking of criminal behavior, we're thinking of mob type of mentality, things that we have definitely seen happening in some cities as well. But the overall movement is a protest. And so it's important to realize the difference between those terminologies, protest versus a riot. Now, if we're talking about the looting and the things going on in different cities, that certainly would be more riot-like behavior. But overall, and I don't know what you all are seeing, but I can tell you from many, many people that are, on the front line and people that are out there, been out there for 10 days that I'm talking to regularly, and friends of mine, myself, who are organizing things. These are protests. These are peaceful protests, or start that way anyway. Sometimes things happen. But again, just the terminology of protest versus riot as you're talking about things. Also, there have been some discomforts where people are feeling like supporting Black Lives Matter means anti-police. So I want to address that also, because nothing about this should be general anti-police, right? So I don't know about many of you, but for me, I have quite a few people in my family are law enforcement, friends that are law enforcement, know some amazing people in law enforcement, and they are just as outraged by this as the rest of us who are. That's the difference. And for them to be thrown into a bucket of anti-Black just because they're a police officer is just not, it's just not correct. what we are talking about right now, what we are fighting in America right now is white supremacy, period. And if a white supremacist happens to have on a uniform, then we're talking about a police officer. We've got to be able to use language and just have frank conversations. I've also had a number of white people who are offended by some of the back and forth because it seems like we're saying all white people, right? So the opposite of Black Lives Matter is not like it's not white opposition or anti, everything is white. It is anti-white supremacy. If you are not a white supremacist, if you are not doing things in your daily life to negatively affect Black people in this country, that just not doing it is not enough, but it's certainly a first step. So when you hear people talking about the opposite of Black Lives Matter or what we're out protesting, and you'll see things about white this or white that, and I am sure, and I've had a number of people say it's so hard sometimes to see that and not take it, offensively or think that they're talking about me or they're throwing us all in the same bucket. But just remember, this is bigger than you. This is bigger than you being fragile about some words or worrying about whatever. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about literally having opportunity to change things in our country. And remember that this is about ending white supremacy. If you are not a white supremacist, the only other option is to be an ally. There's no in between right now, really. There really isn't an in between. So again, not to be fragile yourself, not make it about yourself. But to realize that, some of the verbiage, we can get lost in translation, and just to have open conversations about that.
Thank you for calling that out. As an obviously white person, I can tell you from experience, it's very jarring and unnerving the first time you really get referred to as a group or referred to as white. And that's like the call out, because it's not something we're used to. But that's something that the Black community is very used to. And so you're right, the time for white fragility is over. It's going to be uncomfortable. Everyone's acknowledging it's going to be uncomfortable, but these things, we need to go through this uncomfortability to move forward and make real change.
Absolutely.
Thank you for calling that out about the cops thing too. Like it's very important to remember that you can be absolutely against police brutality without being anti-police. There is a huge difference there.
Absolutely. And little hangups like that keep us from potentially being on the same page and working together, that we find these little divides. And there are people who are looking to divide. Now think about this. If you are a white supremacist, this is a scary time for you in America, because you see people coming together from all different races, all fighting against white supremacy. Black people cannot end white supremacy, period. It's not our fight to fight, but we have to deal with it. So we do have to fight it, but we cannot end it. So it is a responsibility of white people who are not, who don't buy into that, who are not white supremacists, to step in, to be that voice of reason, to help in these things that, again, we cannot end. And that's why allyship is so important.
Yes, thank you for that. And then just to reiterate, since you had addressed on this question, if you're starting these conversations, start from a place of respect and concern for that other person. Don't make it about yourself. Try hard. It's difficult to keep it from being centered on yourself, especially when most of us are going through a lot of emotions that we probably have not felt, or at least not this strongly before. But don't make it about you. It's not about you. The other thing I would like to call out is that personally, I tend to start with almost like a disclaimer. I have some questions. Do you mind if I ask them? Or, starting with, I have an honest curiosity about such and such. Can I ask you these things? It also never hurts to practice the fact of saying something and then realizing that's not how I wanted that to come out. Can I have another go at that? There's nothing wrong with realizing that what you've said is incorrect or hurtful or whatever, and saying, I'm sorry, changing what you said.
Absolutely. And the other thing I want to mention before we go to the next question on this is, we're talking about having conversations about the racial events and how they're feeling about it. I think it's super important for you to realize that this is so much bigger than one event for us. This has been our entire life. This has been our our parents' parents. You know, I was talking to someone the other day and saying that we forget how close this is to us. Like my parents couldn't vote when they turned 18. This is not like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So this is a very, very sensitive subject for us. Also, the imagery right now in the media is extremely difficult for some of us. It's likely very difficult for most of you, I would believe, as well. You know, I was even chatting to Meg and I was telling her that, you know, I have to avoid certain things that will trigger me through this entire situation that's going on. And so certain imagery. So when you're having these conversations, you're going into this conversation open-minded, wanting to know how you can help. And, you know, it's kind of a current affairs, you know, we have to be careful in America. We go from thing to thing. And so this is, you know, what's hot topic right now. So today's hot topic has been forefront in like my topic my entire life. So just be very conscious as you're having these conversations that your expectations aren't about what you're planning on getting out of this. You want to be made to feel better. You want them to know that you care, but you've got to keep in mind where the other person is coming from. You don't know what they've dealt with. You don't know what they're currently dealing with. Like I have 3 Black sons, and one of them is old enough where he's out and about and whatever. And so the fears that I have about this stuff is going to be probably a little different than my white counterparts who are coming to talk to me. So just keep in mind, having empathy as much as you possibly can. I don't expect you to understand or to know where I'm coming from or have that deep rooted feelings, but just to respect the fact that I'm in a different place. And I may not be able to serve your need at that time, right? And so if your need at that time is some understanding, your need at that time are some tools and, you know, wanting to know how you can help. But for me, I'm going through, and I guess I can't do that at that time. Don't come from that conversation feeling defeated or feeling like you don't want to open up or you don't want to remember the other person is, you know, where they are as much as possible.
Thank you for calling that out. I think it's a very important distinction for us also to really internalize and understand. Okay, so for our next question. This one hit me actually. This person says, I don't think I've done a good job of historically creating space for my Black colleagues. Should I reach out to them individually to apologize, or should I just double down and do better moving forward? And then we also have a follow-up question about how can you make sure that Black coworkers' voices remain heard after the media storm dies down? So let's tackle the first question first.
So the first question is interesting. Should I reach out individually? I haven't done this well in the past. Should I reach out individually? So by all means, that's going to be a personal choice. And I can tell you, you will likely, the person receiving that, you'll likely have one of 2 responses, right? So one is this Black person feeling like, you know, you're kind of unloading your conscience now, right? So this again is about you. Sorry, I haven't done this in the past. I'm going to do that. Like that makes you feel better. If you're having a conversation with someone already and you're talking about things and you're engaging them about how they're feeling and what's going on, then sure, I think that can, again, you're human, use your own judgment. However, I think that it's also important to just think about where these things are coming from. More than anything, what's most important, I think, is that we all do better going forward. And in particular, our white colleagues and counterparts are opening themselves up or having conversations like this now, are learning about things that they've never had to touch or learn, hearing about different resources, reading things that you didn't before. So use this time so that you can do better going forward. I think that that's the most important. But that being said, if you think by apologizing, you are creating some type of bridge or some type of opportunity that's going to help better something, use your own. There's no right or wrong. There's some people that might appreciate an apology. For me personally, probably not. Like that doesn't matter to me. I'm like, what are we going to do now? What are here's where we are. Like, are you an ally? How can you help? How can we work together to do this better? So again, I think that one may have a little bit more to do with personal preference. But again, just make sure is the reason you're apologizing to make yourself feel better, then might not be the best approach. But I'll leave that up to you.
Thank you for that. So then for the second half of this question, they want to know how they can make sure their Black coworkers' voices remain heard after the media storm dies down. And this is something that I feel like people are preemptively anticipating, because you're right, America has a pretty short attention span. And so 10 days on any one subject is amazing, but not enough.
Right.
So what can we do after this, if the storm passes, if you want to call it that? I don't love that term, but what could we do to make sure that Black voices continue to be heard?
Yeah, so this is a super important question. So the storm will not die when media stops covering it. That's for sure. We will definitely have tons of work still to be done. So it is going to be important for this not to become, like I said, some hot topic, or this month, we all have our jokes about how terrible 2020 has been, right? And like this being one, and then there's going to be something else or whatever. That can't be. Like, if we truly are going to use this time to make a difference, I think there's a couple things. I think that when you're thinking about how you can be an ally, what you can do to help people, you need to think of long-term things. So not let me apologize and make you all feel better right now doesn't really help in the long term, right? So if you are doing things at work, if you're at work and you're in a position where you're able to affect policies and procedures, and you have people that report to you, where you can have conversations and have open space, et cetera, there are a number of things. What you're doing now, you should continue to do after this, is really the answer. If you're putting things in place now to improve these things again and make safe space, continue to do that afterwards. Just keep in mind, this has been an issue for over 400 years. Like, literally, this has been people's lives and reality, and police brutality has been around we're just now with social media, we're filming it, it's getting out, et cetera. This is not anything new to me. This is not anything new to my father, to my grandfather, to my great-grandfather, et cetera, right? So knowing that when the media stops showing this, that people are still being killed regularly because of police brutality, your job as an ally really is to continue not only the conversation. If you found some organizations you're donating to, please continue to do that after this, because their work will still need to be done. If you have partnered, if you've come up with procedures, if you've come up with different things at work, don't let this be a big hoorah, everybody gets excited, we have these conversations about race, our groups are doing stuff, and then in a month or two it dies. So I'd say the most important thing is the things that you're doing now, the intensity that you are having around doing things, the sense of urgency, that should continue after this.
Thank you. That's a very good way to put that. That sense of urgency needs to continue. It's natural that things might wax and wane. You might, get a little tired fighting the fight, but just remember that there are people that have been fighting this their entire lives, and it is the least you can do to take a 5-minute break and then jump right back into it. Just relentless is honestly the word of the moment at this point.
Absolutely. And the open communication, right? You're talking about things you weren't talking about before. You're talking to people that you may not have ever talked to about how they're feeling about things and how. And remember, prior to 10 days from now, I had the same triggers and the same trauma and the same fight in me that has been there forever. But now we're talking about it. So again, yeah, I definitely keeping the communication, just keeping that sense of focus and energy towards this topic, I think is going to be huge.
Yeah, thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what ways can we manifest frustration into action with difficult people or people who do not want to engage? Do we opt to not focus on them as much at all, or try a different approach? And personally, I read this as being somebody who is white or otherwise not from a minority group, or at least not Black, trying to engage with people who either want to be ignorant of the situation, want to hold a view that, you know, conflicts with your own, something along those lines.
Yeah, so I think that this is important. I personally think that as an ally for, you know, a white person in America, in the world, right? This is bigger. We've seen through the protests. It's bigger than just in America as well. But I think a lot of your work, when you talk about how you can help, a lot of your work has to do with having conversations with those people. I think that in order, again, as I was mentioning, I can't, hold on one second. Here you go. Thank you.
Take your time. Thank you so much.
Sorry about that. Yeah. When I mentioned that I can't end white supremacy, right? And Black people in general can't end white supremacy. Typically, you know, one of the things that we tend to do just as human beings is when we look at our circle typically looks a lot like us. Sometimes it's by preference and on purpose, but oftentimes it's just that we tend to be attracted to people that like a lot of the same things that we like, that have similar experiences, etc. What that means is that you have a seat at the table, you are in conversations, your circle is one that I likely will not have. You will have the opportunity for people to learn about whether it's Black Lives Matter or how to be an ally. They can learn things from you that they would automatically shut down if it was coming from me, because they want to be defensive, or I'm not like that, or I'm not whatever, or there're just certain things that we've been taught and grown up that we don't talk about politics, you don't talk about race, there's a number of things. So I think one of the things that's most important, and this goes back to my statement earlier about that this work is not comfortable. This is not comfortable work. You know, I always talk about, like, I'm from the South, right? So we're raised to want to make everyone happy and to be very cordial. And as women, there's, you know, certain ways that we are taught to do things. And it's all about, you know, making people around us comfortable. And this work is not that. But we have to remember that in order to truly be an ally with this is not about ourselves. It's not about doing the things that are comfortable. You're going to put yourself out there, and you might have a Black person that says, oh, you're white, I don't care what your opinion is, you shouldn't be in this conversation. That might happen, and you've got to be okay with that, because it's part of this work, right? It's uncomfortable. And you also have to remember where that Black person is potentially coming from. What type of, you want to talk about discomfort, and I won't get on that whole, you know, I can go on and on, about the person sitting next to you in the cube next to you, leaves work, goes home, has, you know, potentially has children or husband or father, etc., who are regularly discriminated against, who are dealing with things that you can't even fathom. You have people in America who have made tons of right choices, gone to school, worked their butt off, gotten to work, don't necessarily have the relationships and work with leadership. They don't see other people like them. They feel stagnant. They can't get into doors that you can get into, even though you don't realize you're getting into them. You've got to realize where people are coming from, and that's not to say you're going to understand everything, but it's that level of empathy that's super important. So back to my point. My point is that you need to be ready to engage those difficult people. Now, if there's someone that's taking away your energy from doing the work you need to do, I mean, we can only do so much, right? You can talk to people, you can share information. I found when I was younger, I would find myself in these long, lengthy debates about things and getting all, you know, upset about things. And I still get upset about things, but I started realizing, you know, certain people just, they think what they think, they are who they are. I'm going to do my part to expose you. I'm going to do my part to lay it on the line. I'm also going to do my part to like cut you off if you are not on the side of good. If you are not on the side of what's right, then I cannot pretend and I cannot keep you in my circle and pretend that that's not there. But be prepared to deal with people who are going to not understand why you care so much about this. Be prepared to talk to people who have every reason in the world to talk about why George Floyd, shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. He would have never gotten himself in this situation. Be prepared for people to really think that way, and be ready to stand your point. And you never know what can come out of it. I've seen a lot of people who that's how they learn and they begin. But again, just be mindful where you use your energy. We're trying to move forward. We have a great movement of people that are like in the streets and that are pushing towards things, using your energy that way, but also be prepared for those tough conversations and that everyone is not going to be okay with what you're doing.
I think that's a very important thing to remember, is that distinction between your emotional discomfort versus, on the other side of this whole thing, is people that have been experiencing that discomfort and living in that discomfort. You're experiencing it probably for the first time or one of the first times, and that's sharp and it's painful, and we understand that, but it is, emotional discomfort does not outrank literal physical discomfort, lifelong, oppression, and the whole systemic issue that is really being brought to the forefront of this. So I think that's a very important thing to call out from what Deanna said. The other part that I do want to make sure you guys are listening to is about the energy thing. Personally, I've had a lot of really surprising conversations in the last week. I've also had a lot of frustrating ones. So I kind of play by the Deanna playbook of, if I have the energy and can address this, I do. If not, I put a pin in it to come back later. I also personally don't engage in a lot of these discussions online. I start there, but if it's not successful or if it needs to be taken offline, I know that's difficult to do in a pandemic. We're not supposed to gather. We're not supposed to, supposed to still be social distancing. But there are ways to have these conversations in forums that will help you reach people, or at the very least help you try and express yourself adequately, as opposed to resorting to name calling or vitriol or online badgering and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
All right, this I thought was a really interesting question as well. How can other minority groups be allies to the Black community while also understanding the privileges and biases held against them? So intersectionality is, I think, a huge thing right now, yes. Especially since we talk about the intersection of not only the Black Lives Movement, but also it's Pride Month. And that is important to recognize that Pride would be nowhere were it not for a lot of minorities, women of color, trans individuals. It's very important.
Absolutely. So this question is super important. When we talk about allyship, it means a number of different things. I think white allyship can sometimes be a little different in the sense that if you are in positions of power to make things happen, if you're having conversations with people that can shift things, etc., all of that is huge. When we start talking about other minority groups and what allyship looks like that way, I think in America, at least, we have kind of naturally, and that's where the people of color and these women of color kind of terms have come into play. We've naturally, and this tends to happen in general, that those who are oppressed tend to find others, right, that understand them, and so that they can come together. So I would say, to me, we have a lot of that allyship going on already. However, what's different about this is that Black people have kind of demanded the distinction of this is about Black lives. So if you are Latino, if you are Asian, if you are the Middle East, wherever your ethnic group or a minority here in this country, and you're looking for how you can help, it's going to be very similar to me. As far as if we talk about just general allyship, which is sharing information, which is making sure, because let's just face it, even amongst minority groups, there tends to be a pecking order. There tends to be division there also, right? So I won't get, that's a whole other conversation. So it's important for you to continue to dispel stereotypes and within your own community. It's important for you to stand up for what's right and being that voice in your family and in your community and helping them realize why this is their fight also. Again, when we think about in America, Black people have been here for 400 something years. We typically, almost all of my white friends, my family lineage is further, has been here longer, right? Not by choice though. I say that to say that this has just been the way, business as usual. And now that has to stop. That's not going to stop just by Black people making changes. Definitely, because white people in America tend to have control. We've got to have that allyship. But as minorities in this country, I think most of us would agree, or we just know that the facts are, if you combine all the minorities in this country, we're either very close or more. And there's this fear amongst white supremacists about all the different ethnicities and how our country is growing. What's most important, again, is if you are a minority, I know that you typically have your own fight too, right? You have certain things in your community that are important. You have issues that should be on the forefront. And I've even had some people, or I've seen people saying, okay, Black Lives Matter, but as Latinos, we're still going through this. Our brothers and sisters are getting beat and killed also. People in the Asian community, especially coming off some of the terrible things that were going on against Asian Americans with COVID, et cetera. It's like, we have a fight too. And I absolutely know you do. And I know for me as a Black woman, have solidarity to help with those fights also. But I think it's important right now for us to stay focused. If we're focusing on Black Lives Matter, we're focusing on moving the needle there. And all it's gonna do is empower us as a nation and as a group of minorities to be able to push other people forward as well. So short answer is, keep these conversations relevant in your community. Remind your family and your community why this is so important. Trying to take yourself out of it and having empathy for what's happening right now with Black people, I think is like the most important thing you can do.
I agree. If you come from either a minority community or a special interest community, or if you are in any way in one of those groups that's not usually recognized as the dominant feature in any conversation, it's if you want to use police brutality as your, kind of your gateway to realize that this is an issue that affects you as well, that is fine, but do not lose track of the fact that this is a crisis for the Black community. And as such, it should be treated as a crisis for all of us, because as we keep seeing on the news, and as you see more protest videos and things, yes, this incredibly and astronomically impacts the Black community, but it will keep impacting others if we don't do something. So this is, it's okay to use your perspective as a gateway for why you should care about something, but don't lose track of the crux and the thrust of this argument. Okay, so this is a little bit more business related. What do you do if your HR team is not willing to make an internal statement regarding the current situation? How can I influence leadership in my company to be more diverse and inclusive? And you and I talked this morning about how incredibly lucky we are to be working at a place that not only has a platform, but is not even just willing, enthusiastic about saying, yes, we have this platform, we're going to use it to educate people, we're going to use it to make sure that people understand and get the information they need. So if you're not in that situation, say your company has yet to say anything, what can you do?
This is a great question too. And so I've had a lot of conversations with Black HR practitioners that are extremely frustrated with their companies because they don't want to take a stance, right? And so they are meeting with leadership, et cetera. There's a couple things that I would say. So the first thing is that if you ever had a fighting chance to have them pay attention to Black issues and how it affects corporate and their needs to do it, it's now. So don't don't give up super easily on this. I would say don't give up at all, but people have different reasons for different things that they do. But now is the time, because unfortunately there are some business decisions that are made because it's just the right thing to do. There are definitely business decisions that are made because financially speaking, it's the best for the company. But there also is this sense of shame right now. And if you've got to use the shame tactic, I think, hey, do what you have to do. Right now, there's no room for like the middle road or sitting on the fence. It's just not. So what I would say when you're talking to leadership is it's going to be important and imperative. Not only are Black people looking to see what companies are standing up for them and who is taking a stance, but I think people in general who are part of this movement, and that goes far beyond just Black people, are looking at that. It's going to matter. It's going to affect your business. An example, and this is not quite business, but I'm from New Orleans, and I'm probably one of the biggest Saints fans you'll ever meet in life. And was most of you have probably heard a statement that our quarterback made recently that seemed to go against Black Lives Matter, whether or not that was his intention or not. But because of that statement, like literally, because I know people that are working with NFL and Saints, et cetera, they're in panic mode. Like we can't have a person on the forefront not being a part of moving this forward. So you have more leverage than ever to try and push your company. So if you are lucky enough to sit in rooms, meaning you're at the board, you're in board meetings, you're in meetings with senior leadership, add it to the agenda for your meeting. If you're having group meetings for your team, add it to the agenda. If you're not in HR, reaching out to your HR person and asking them, what are we doing specifically right now with everything that's going on? How are we supporting Black people? How are we supporting Black Lives Matter? And how are we letting employees know what they can do? The more you asking, you putting pressure, and if the HR manager doesn't know, go to your director. If your director doesn't know, go to your VP. I guarantee you, again, if you were ever able to get a meeting or on the calendar of your VP of HR or someone really high up, this subject right now will open doors that it wouldn't before. So don't give up, for sure. Again, adding to meeting agendas, asking questions, that trying not, and hopefully would not have this fear that if I speak up about this, that I could lose my job, that I'll be overlooked for things, etc. And every employer is different. They're not created equal, so I can't say blanket across the board. But I would say in general, you're in this is the time to do it. People are more likely to listen. People are more likely to understand why you specifically want them to address things that have to do with the Black community.
Thank you. I also threw a link into the chat for anybody that wants it to a previous conversation that we had with Deanna on this exact subject. It's got action points and talking points in case you need ideas or need inspiration on how to exactly start or continue these conversations with your employer. Okay. My team and I develop science curriculum for K-8 classrooms. How can I help my team, which is mostly white, process these events and use them to galvanize us to a long-term action? So you and I spoke earlier about this question, and we were pretty interested in it from a couple angles, most notably the impact on children, and then that kind of leads into how parents are dealing with this whole situation with their kids right now.
Yeah, so I'll address the science curriculum part of it. Like as I was reading through that question, I thought that, amazing that a person that's creating science curriculum sees the importance that these events would have on the work that they do, right? Because we're influencing students. We have a whole generation coming up behind us that hopefully, like with the work that we're doing now, we'll be able to kind of bring them into a world that's a little different, right? This is going to be for them, perhaps, a notable shift in the world like the civil rights movement was for my parents. So that being said, in the classroom, obviously, if you're doing science curriculum, being aware that, let me make sure that I'm also highlighting Black people in America that did a ton for science, making sure that your curriculum and the work that you're doing is inclusive. And in particular, again, when we think about Black people and as much as they did in this country and worked for 400 years for no pay, little recognition, if any, et cetera. But there are tons of things that were accomplished and there's tons of resources. And as Meg mentioned, we're going to share some of those resources. We'll be sure to include an educational one as well. But making sure that as you're creating this, that you are making sure that Black scientists and inventions and work that has been done after Flint with the water, there were Black science entrepreneurs that have done amazing things, just making sure that you're including that. Now, I want to take this question and go a little different direction also for parents. I've had a number of parents reach out, white parents and Black parents. In particular, I've had more probably white parents reaching out, like, how do I have, they're being forced to now have a conversation with their children that they haven't had to have before. I've always had to have this conversation with my children, unfortunately, because I can't not. But now, because it's all over the news, because of everything going on, I think that there are, and I know for the most part, most of the people that I've talked to who are white weren't having these conversations about race with their children at an early age to protect them. Like, I totally get it. Again, I didn't have that option. That's not something that I could do, but now I think it's important. So I say that to say, there are a number of, I don't allow my children to watch news, so I never would say that the news is a great place for that. But I do think that it's going to be important to have conversations with your children now, just about not only what's going on in the world, but about the history of this country and why it's going on. It can be a scary thing, if you think about it, but again, it is a scary thing and it's reality. And we've got to figure out how to have these conversations as early as possible so that as the children who are coming along, their conversations are going to be very different than ours. And for them not to know, I think we're in a state now, and this is for adults for sure, but ignorance is not an excuse anymore. That doesn't help anyone. It doesn't get you a pass. We've got to be aware. So couple things for kids, I would just say, there's a number, we'll include a resource as well in the blog that's towards kind of how to talk to your children about these things that are going on. That's one way. The other thing is, I do think that it's also equally important as we're getting books, as we are watching, having cartoon programs and things that we're exposing our children to, that we are ensuring that they're also seeing Black, Brown, Asian, everyone in their day-to-day characters, et cetera, because that's how they're learning. In particular, books. As parents, we can decide what books they get. That's going to be super important. And then also our circle. We talked about our homogeneous circles, right? We have circles of friends that typically look like us, have the same background. Going outside of that, whether it's neighbors or depending on the school you're in, but just exposure is the biggest, especially for kids that are exposed to people of different races, different sexual orientation, all of that as early as possible, don't have the same hangups that we've had, right? Or that our parents had. So again, we'll include some resources, but I think just having conversations and it's just like at work, with diversity and inclusion work, it doesn't just happen. Your teams don't just become diverse. People don't just feel like they belong just because they're supposed to. It is intentional. It is strategy, et cetera. We have to do the same thing with our children, and in particular, white children in this country who are also going to be hearing messages about what white people have done or white oppression, white whatever. You've got to make sure that they understand that that doesn't mean that they're a bad person, right? It doesn't mean that, but for them to understand what that means in history and the responsibility that comes along with it. So we'll include some resources, and I feel like we could probably have a whole other chat, one just talking about the parenting side of this.
Oh, absolutely. And the one thing I do know, I'm not a parent, my friends, they're, especially the younger children, they are looking forward to a town hall that CNN is hosting with Sesame Street at 10 a.m. tomorrow, or yes, tomorrow morning. So Google that. It's real easy to find it. I'm sure they'll be doing probably a YouTube link or something for anybody that doesn't have cable, but that would be a very good placeholder, especially if you are in a position like a lot of parents and trying to educate yourself so that you know what to say to your kids. Don't pause this. Try it. Just keep working through it and keep showing and leading, showing them with leading by example that it's okay to think something, learn new information, change your perspective. This is how life goes.
Absolutely. And this is your kids or nieces, nephews, cousins, like children that are that you have some type of influence on. So keep that in mind, even if you don't have children yourself.
All right, so we have 4 minutes left. I seriously wish this was another hour and a half long. We have 4 minutes left. I do want to touch on this question about safe spaces. And I would like to make sure that we address the idea of overstepping as, sounds really benign, but like well-intentioned people that want to try and help and how you can be supportive without overstepping. So
absolutely.
Let's start with this question about the safe spaces. We'll cover the next one. If it takes us over the hour, I'm okay with that. We just won't continue and drag everybody's day on forever.
Yeah. So a couple things I think that when we talk about how do I create safe spaces, well, as a leader, this is a really important question. So it's not only saying we are going to be open and be able to talk about these things, say like at work, but it's leading by example, right? So we're going to, for our next meeting, we're going to actually read this book, and it has something to do with, race, ties to your business or whatever you're doing also, but you're going to make it a priority, right? So I'm going to read this book. I have opinions on things, not just I'm going to get a conference room and I'm going to allow you guys an hour to talk it out and to talk about race or whatever, but to be a leader, making suggestions, doing research and having resources for your white and Black employees for that. Because I'll tell you, one of the things that is super helpful for me, whether it's been at work from managers or leaders, or even as we're going through this, and I think about like our co-founders in our company, is that they're taking the time. Now, they may not always know the right answer or but they are taking the time to research themselves. They care about the topic. They're asking for my opinion on things. All of those things make a huge difference. Also, I just want to say around safe space, the other thing around safe space, and I'll cut short because I know we're almost out of time, is that that other question about HR, or how do I talk to leaders and get them to acknowledge what's going on. You will know that you've created a safe space when your employees feel like they can come and send you an email or knock on your door and talk to you about how this is important and what they think you can do differently. Then you know that you have created, or if you haven't, I'm sure they'll let you know that also, and that'll be something to add onto the agenda. But again, just being aware that the people that work for you who are Black in America in general, we often are just not okay and we're carrying trauma. Right now, it's likely intensified. Don't pretend that it's not there. Don't pretend that you can fix it or you have all the answers to it, but just being open. How can I help you? Also being careful that as you are opening these conversations about race, et cetera, is not to assume that everyone wants to be the spokesperson for Black people, right? Or that the one Black person on your team wants to be the person to plan all these events and to do everything. Adding more work on them that they don't want to do. There are other people, and I explained this to Meg earlier, for me, I love this. I have a new baby. I'm not on the front line right now. This is me giving back, and this is me helping, and this is me being me, right? Being able to talk and create safe space. If you have an employee that loves that and wants to help, great, but not to force them or to assume that they want to take that on in addition to whatever their job is. So just having those conversations.
Thank you for that, Deanna. And that's a very good distinction. Don't add to somebody else's workload, especially when it's something, you know, we all live in the age of the internet. You can use Google, you can do research, you can educate yourself. Just, I think that's one of the important call outs, especially when people keep asking for resources. Resources are great, but make sure you're doing the work to listen to people of color. It can't just be, oh, this book written by some white girl or some white dude telling you how to talk about race. You need to make sure you are doing the work to seek out voices of color. And not every voice of color will represent the entire group, because obviously, like, no group is a monolith, but do the work, try and make sure you're listening to the people that you say you want to support.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to skip over this question because a lot of people had asked us about action items. I think that there's a lot of resources that we can share and reshare. So keep following us on our social channels. We will be resharing action items and like real concrete things of what you can do. Okay. So just to let you guys know, we did put a lot into this.
For those that are jumping off too, I just want to thank you guys so much for spending this time. This is a first step. When people are asking, what can I do? Things like this are things that you can do. Thank you for joining. If you have questions for us, feel free. And again, we'll provide some resources, and likely I'll have additional conversations like this in the future as well to continue the conversation. But this is definitely a first step. I thank you all so much for coming in. Anything that we can do at PowerToFly. And I'm sure Meg will share about our diversity summit coming up and some other resources that can help you as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Deanna. Okay, so do you want to cover this last question, or do we want to save it for a future chat then?
I think we'll save it for a future chat. Yeah, I see a lot of people taking off. I want to give you time to close out.
So, Deanna, thank you. This was a very necessary and very important chat. I think you made this a lot easier on us than, frankly, a lot of us deserve. So thank you for that.
Thank you for listening and for giving me an opportunity.
Hey, we're here to listen and learn. All right, so the one last thing, like Deanna said, I do want to call out, if you are at all concerned or have questions about how these conversations are going to go, please, please, please take a look at our diversity reboot sign up. You can register for the virtual fair or the virtual summit, which will give you access to speakers who are really powerful thought leaders in a lot of areas that will be impacted by this movement, and to see how this is going to shape our lives going forward. So if you want to hear more from people leading the charge on issues like this, please sign up for the Diversity Summit. It's free. You can come and stay as long as you want, bounce around to different speakers. It's going to be awesome. Plus, basically everybody at PowerToFly will be there. There's also going to be a job fair component. So please, if you need help and are looking for work right now, as I know a lot of us are, that is definitely something I encourage you all to take a look at. Nicole is throwing a bunch of links into the chat. It's powertofly.com/summit/. So please, if you have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me. There's also our email, hi@powertofly.com, and you can reach out on any of our socials, and we will respond and try and give everybody the information that they need. So thank you to everyone who took time to join us today and spent their afternoon with us. Have a happy Friday, and I hope everyone has a safe and pleasant weekend. Keep up the fight.
Thanks, Meg.
Thank you, Deanna.